Idaho Territory, July 1876. The first bullet missed her by an inch. Gwenna Clarke dropped to the ground behind a mesquite bush, heart pounding like a war drum. The sun was high, the air dry enough to rip your throat raw, but the blood soaking her apron was still warm. She pressed firm on the wound in the stranger's gut, her hands slick with it. "You're going to live," she said, more to herself than him. The man groaned, barely conscious. His skin was too pale for a local, boots too clean for a settler, and that Union blue coat torn and stained spoke louder than words. He was a soldier. A northern soldier. And Gwenna had just saved him. The sound of hooves came fast, angry riders from her town. She could hear them shouting her name. Gwenna Clarke." She looked down at the bleeding man. He was maybe 30, no gun, no hat, barely holding on. She did not know his name, but she had seen the wound, had watched him fall from his horse less than a mile out of town. Her instinct had kicked in before her mind could catch up. Now she was crouched in the dirt with a Yankee, and her people were coming. By the time they found her, she had wrapped the wound with part of her own dress and kept him alive with a canteen of water. She stood when she heard the click of a rifle behind her. It was her uncle, Sheriff Callum, face red and mouth thin. "You aiding a Union man?" he asked, voice hard. Gwenna stared at him, then at the others' neighbors, men she had grown up with. "He was bleeding out. He killed 2 of our boys at the river last week. He did not have a gun, he was trying to get away." "You touched him," her uncle said. "You chose him." Gwenna squared her shoulders. "I chose not to watch a man die. That was all it took. They gave her an hour to pack. Said she had until sunset to be out of town. She did not cry. She did not beg. She walked back to her cabin, wrapped her mother's necklace in a handkerchief, and took only what she could carry. She left with a mule and a rifle and the man she had saved. He never woke again. Died that night under a cottonwood tree, his blood finally outpacing her stubbornness. She buried him there, said a prayer, and kept walking. 3 weeks later, Gwenna Clarke was still walking. Her boots were worn down, her skin burned to leather, and her pride was the only thing keeping her upright. She had passed through 2 towns that turned her away. Word traveled faster than she expected. No one wanted a woman who betrayed her own. It was near dusk when she saw the ranch house. The land rolled wide and green against the foothills, with cattle dotting the fields and a barn standing proud against the sky. Smoke curled from the chimney and the fences were mended. Someone lived here, someone who worked hard. She hesitated at the gate, dirt-covered and half-starved, her hands trembling. She was ready to be turned away again, but when she knocked, the door opened. He stood tall, broad-shouldered, sun-browned. His eyes were steady, the color of heavy soil. He looked at her like he was seeing something real, not just some stranger on his porch. "You lost?" he asked. "I need work," she said. He glanced at the rifle strapped to her back, the dried blood on her sleeves. "You a hunter?" "No, I am a healer." He stepped aside. "Come in." She followed him into the warmth of the house. The floor was swept, the table clean, and the smell of stew hung in the air like a promise. He poured her water first, then gave her stew. "My name's Lawson Keene," he said. "This is my place." "Gwenna Clarke." He raised an eyebrow. "You the one who saved that soldier?" She froze. He set down his spoon. "I heard the story. I will leave." "No," he said. "Sit." She stayed sitting, unsure why. He studied her face. "You knew what it would cost, but you did it anyway." "I could not let him die." Lawson leaned back. "That is a heart worth marrying." Her spoon clattered against the bowl. "I did not come for that." "I did not say I was offering it," he said, calm, "but I do not see many folks with that kind of heart anymore." They sat in silence for a long while after. He gave her a bed in the loft. Told her she could earn her keep helping tend the sick cattle and cooking meals. She did not ask questions. She just worked. Days passed quiet. Gwenna learned the rhythm of the place. She rose before the sun and helped mend fence lines. She stitched a wound on a calf's leg like she had done for men back home. Lawson watched her sometimes from the barn doorway, arms crossed, gaze unreadable. One evening, he brought her a book, said it had belonged to his mother. "I saw you reading by the fire. Thought you might like it." She took it, fingers brushing his. "Thank you," he nodded once. "You ever think of going back?" She shook her head. "I have nowhere to go." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe you do. Just not where you left." After that, he started eating meals with her at the table. He told her about his brother who died in the war and how he came west to forget the world. She listened, and for the first time in weeks her chest did not feel so tight. One night a storm rolled in, loud and angry. She woke cold and afraid. The wind howled like ghosts. She went downstairs and found him already stoking the fire. He did not ask why she came. He just handed her a blanket and sat beside her. "You are not like the others," she said softly. "No," he replied, "and neither are you." She looked at him, the firelight warming the lines of his face. "I was banished for saving a man. That cost me everything." "That was not the cost," Lawson said. "That was the proof." "Of what?" He looked her straight in the eyes. "That you are someone worth saving too." Her breath caught, and for the first time she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, her story was not over yet. The summer deepened. Dust clung to the folds of Gwenna's skirt as she moved along the fence line, a pail of nails in her left hand, hammer in her right. The boards were stubborn, warped from heat and time, but she had grown accustomed to their resistance. Her palms bore new calluses. Her arms, once small and narrow, had hardened with weeks of labor. She swung and drove each nail with a clean strike, focused. Lawson worked on the far edge of the pasture, coaxing a limping steer into the corral. His voice was low, calm, and the animal responded. She watched him briefly, noting how his movements were steady but never harsh. He did not dominate the land or the creatures on it, he moved with them, like someone who knew the earth could turn on you if you didn't show respect. That night, she stood at the pump washing the dirt from her arms. The sky was streaked with rose and copper, the wind gentler than usual. Lawson leaned against the porch rail, his hat pushed back. He'd taken to watching the horizon like it might offer answers if he studied it long enough. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. She dried her hands slowly. "I haven't thought about leaving," he nodded once. "That's something." She stepped onto the porch, the boards warm beneath her feet. The silence between them was not strained. It had softened over the past weeks, turned into something familiar, like a worn path between two homes. "You ever lose something that kept you anchored?" she asked, not looking at him. He didn't answer right away. "Had a dog when I was a boy. Blue heeler, named him Flint. Smartest thing I ever knew. He'd trail cattle without a word from me. Kept at my side through every season." "What happened?" Rattler got him. "Spring of '67, her voice was quiet. "That's not what I meant," he studied her. "No, it's not." She sat on the top step. "I lost my place, my kin. My name, in a way." Lawson came down beside her, arms resting on his knees. "You lost folks who didn't see you right. That's not the same as being alone. You think I don't know the difference. I think you know it too well." They sat until the sun dipped low. Later, Gwenna lit the lamp in the kitchen and set to grinding herbs at the table. Lawson had given her use of the old root cellar, and she'd begun collecting what she could: yarrow, horehound, wild mint. The land had its own medicine if you looked close enough. He walked in, carrying a small, wrapped bundle. Found this in the barn loft, thought it might be useful. She unfolded it carefully: linen bandages, coarse wool thread, a rusted needle she could clean up. "Thank you. You made a salve for that colt's leg last week." "He's walking better," she nodded once. "I added pine resin, keeps infection out. You always know what to use." "No, I listen. The body tells you if you're quiet enough." His gaze held hers. "You ever think about doing this for more than cattle?" She hesitated. "I used to treat people." "Back home, you ought to again." Gwenna looked down at the bundle. "You think this land would let me?" "I think this land don't care where you come from, only how steady your hands are when someone's hurting." She folded the cloth and stood. "Why are you being kind to me?" Lawson didn't hesitate. "Because I'm not blind." The wind pressed against the house, lifting the edge of the curtain. Gwenna tucked the bundle into her satchel and busied herself with the lamp, but her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the way truth sometimes felt like a bruise being pressed. The following week brought a boy to their door. He couldn't have been more than 12, thin as fence wire, with a bloodied cloth around his forearm. His horse was lathered and near collapse. Gwenna stepped out first before the boy could even knock. "What happened?" she asked, already reaching for his arm. "Ma sent me. My sister, she cut her leg bad on a broken plow blade. Can't stop the bleeding." Lawson stepped down from the porch. "How far?" 3 miles across the ridge. I'll hitch the wagon, Lawson said. Gwenna wrapped the boy's arm with clean linen and gathered her satchel. They rode out 10 minutes later, the wagon jolting hard over dry ruts. The boy sat wedged between them, silent except for the occasional direction. They reached the homestead as the sun leaned westward. The girl lay pale on a cot inside, barely conscious. Gwenna dropped to her knees beside her, unwrapped the soaked cloth and pressed fresh linens firm. I need boiled water, she said, already pulling a jar of powdered bark from her case. And something to bite on. The mother, harried and red-eyed, obeyed without question. Lawson stayed back, hands clasped behind him as Gwenna worked. She stitched clean and fast, her voice calm, her touch sure. When it was done, the girl's breathing had steadied. You saved her, the mother whispered. Gwenna washed her hands outside with water from the rain barrel. Lawson passed her a clean towel. You didn't hesitate, he said. She was bleeding. He looked at her like he was seeing something new. Or maybe something he'd suspected but finally understood. On the way home, the boy asleep in the wagon bed, Gwenna broke the quiet. You said before that this land doesn't care where you come from. I did. She looked across the fields, heat still rising from the earth like breath. Do you? No, Lawson said, but I care where you go next. She turned to him, heart thudding slow, deep. And where do you think that is? He kept his eyes on the road. Right here if you'll let it be. The cotton harvest came early that year. Dry winds had curled the edges of the fields, and the air held the sharp scent of brittle leaves. Gwenna woke before first light, as she always did now, and stepped into the morning with her braid damp against her back. In the half-dark, the house was still, save the soft clink of Lawson's belt buckle as he moved from the barn. She found him kneeling beside the wagon's rear axle, oiling the wheel with slow, practiced turns. His shirt clung to his back from the heat already building in the air. You're headed to town, she asked. He glanced up, a streak of grease on his wrist. Need salt and seed. Thought I'd check the post, see if that ledger came in. She nodded. There's a woman near the creek, her boy's been coughing at night. I'd like to send her some horehound and mullein. If you'd take it. He stood and wiped his hands on a rag. Leave it by the door, I'll see it gets there. Gwenna turned to go, then paused. It's been easier here than I expected. Lawson leaned against the wagon. You thought it would be hard. I didn't think I'd be welcome, but this land. It doesn't ask questions. He studied her face. It listens, though, more than most people. She looked toward the hills where the sun had just begun to touch the tops. It's a quiet kind of mercy. He didn't answer, but his silence held weight, not dismissal. By mid-morning, she was in the field near the orchard, cutting back wild rose that had overtaken the fence line. The work was slow, thorns biting through her gloves, but she didn't mind. The rhythm of hands and breath steadied her thoughts. She'd begun planting chamomile and goldenrod beside the well, rose neat and hopeful. The land had given her room, and she was trying to return the favor. A rider approached near noon. A woman in a faded calico bonnet, with a basket tied behind her saddle. Gwenna rested her knife and stepped out of the brush, wiping her brow with the hem of her sleeve. You're Miss Clarke? The woman asked, voice cautious. Gwenna nodded. I am. My brother said you stitched up his girl last week. She's healing clean, I came to ask. If you'd look at my husband. What's wrong? He fell from the hayloft. Can't get up and there's swelling in his back. Won't eat. I don't know what to do. Gwenna untied her apron and grabbed her satchel without hesitation. How far? 2 miles north. I've got a spare mount. They rode hard, the woman leading. Dust rose behind them in ribbons. When they reached the homestead, Gwenna found the man pale and feverish, his breath shallow. She asked no questions, only set to work. She brewed willow bark with a handful of sage, laid compresses along his spine, and checked for signs of broken bone. He needs rest and quiet, she told the woman. Keep this poultice cool, change it twice a day. The woman pressed her hands together. You're the first person who's come without judgment. Gwenna packed her things, voice low. I didn't come to judge, I came to help. She returned to the ranch near sundown. Lawson was at the porch, boots off, sharpening a blade. He looked up as she dismounted. You didn't leave a note, he said evenly. There wasn't time. She handed him a bundle of herbs, the ones he'd promised to deliver. I gave the rest to someone who needed it more. He set the blade aside. You always run toward trouble, only when it's calling. He walked down the steps, gaze steady. You're good at this, you know that. I know what pain looks like. I've seen too much of it to turn away. He took the reins and tied off her horse. You're building something here. I don't know what yet. I do, he said. She looked at him then, really looked. The dust on his sleeves, the faint crease at the corner of his mouth, the quiet certainty in his stance. I never thought I'd be seen again, she said softly. You weren't just seen, he said. You were chosen. She stepped back, overwhelmed. I don't know how to belong anymore. You already do. You just haven't let yourself believe it. Inside, the lantern flickered low. She moved to the hearth, hands trembling slightly as she lit the fire. Lawson stood behind her, close but not pressing. I don't want to be a burden, she whispered. You're not. I'm not the same woman I was. I know, he said. That's why you belong here. She turned to face him. The air between them was warm, charged with something both fragile and unshakable. I don't need saving, she said. I never thought you did. And then she stepped forward, not because she was unsure, but because she was ready. He met her there, arms steady, the kind of touch that didn't ask for anything more than presence. In that quiet room, with nothing but the creak of the wind outside and the scent of smoke curling between them, Gwenna Clarke leaned into something new, not safety, not rescue, but a beginning. Earned, not given, the first frost came overnight. Gwenna stepped outside in her shawl just after dawn, breath curling in the air like smoke. The ground was silvered, each blade of grass rimmed in ice. She knelt beside the herb beds and touched a limp stalk of goldenrod, softened by the cold. Not dead, but close. She began trimming what she could salvage, her basket filling slowly. Lawson was already in the barn, the steady rhythm of brushing and feeding drifting out through the half-open doors. She found him there, sleeves rolled, his breath misting as he worked through the morning chores. He looked over his shoulder. Thought I'd ride out to the north slope today. Cattle have been drifting that way. She set down the basket. Take some of the dried tobacco leaves. If you burn them near the tree line, it'll draw them back. He paused, then nodded. That you're doing last week. I found the herd circled up close to the house. They follow scent same as hunger, especially when the cold comes fast. He leaned his forearm against the stall door. You ever think about teaching someone what you know? No one's asked. I'm asking. She met his gaze. You want to learn healing. I want to understand what keeps you steady. Might do me some good. She tilted her head. It's not a trade you study to pass the time, I know. He hooked a thumb toward the pasture, but I've seen what you've done for others. Figured I could do more than just fix fences. She studied him. You'd have to start with listening. Not just to people but to silence. Hurt lives in quiet places. I can be quiet. I've noticed. He let the moment linger, then turned back to the horses. There's a woman coming by today. Widow from the settlement. Asked if she could bring her boy. Says he don't speak much and he's taken to hiding under the porch. Gwenna dusted frost off her skirt. I'll be here. He glanced at her again. She heard about you from the family you helped last week. Words moving. That always happens. Just depends what kind of word it is. This one's good. By midday, the sun had melted the frost to dew. Gwenna lit the stove and boiled water for a poultice, laying out clean cloth and a jar of dried bark she'd ground the day before. When the widow arrived, the boy wouldn't come inside. He crouched behind the rain barrel, eyes wide and wary. She didn't call to him. Instead, she stepped outside and sat on the porch with a small wooden whistle she kept tucked in her apron. She played a low, steady tune, not sweet, but even. After a while, the boy crept out, drawn by the sound. Your hands cold? She asked, offering him a warm cloth. He didn't answer, but he took it and held it tight. Inside, she gave him a piece of dried apple and let him sit near the hearth while she spoke with his mother. The boy's silence wasn't fear. It was memory stuck behind his ribs. She recognized it, had carried it herself. Lawson came in from the barn as the sun dipped low. He paused when he saw the boy curled on the rug, fast asleep. You did that without saying much, he said. Sometimes that's the only way. He leaned against the doorframe. You ever think you'd end up here, teaching grown men to burn tobacco leaves and coaxing children out of silence? No, she said, but I knew I couldn't keep running. You're not running now. She looked up at him. I stopped the moment someone made room for me. The fire snapped softly behind them. He stepped closer, slow and sure. You rebuilt a life here, Gwenna. She folded the cloth in her lap. Not alone. He didn't answer right away. His hand brushed hers gently, asking rather than taking. "You still look like you expect someone to take this away." She turned her palm to his. "I always will, but I'm learning not to live like it," he nodded. "That's all I ask." The widow returned 2 days later, this time with a sack of winter beans and a pie wrapped in linen. The boy came too and helped Gwenna grind dried mint into powder. By the end of the week, Lawson had memorized the signs of fever and how to test for swelling in a joint. His hands were rough, but careful. She let him stitch a tear in a saddle blanket using the same technique she used on skin. "You're better at this than you think," she told him. He shrugged. "I've got a good teacher." That night they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the stars slip out one by one. He shifted toward her. "You ever want to leave again, I'll understand. But I'd rather you stayed." She looked at his profile, solid in the starlight. "I'm not going anywhere." He took her hand, warm and certain. "I meant it, you know," he said. "What I said that first night." She turned to him fully. "About my heart," he nodded. "Still true," her voice was soft. "And yours?" He didn't answer with words. Instead, he leaned forward, slow and sure, and kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life to mean something to someone who saw him plain. She kissed him back, steady and without fear. And in that quiet, frost-brushed night, two people who had learned how to survive alone finally chose to live together. The wedding was held under the sycamore behind the house, where the roots sank deep and the branches arched wide enough to hold the sky. Gwenna wore a dress sewn from leftover muslin and bits of lace Lawson had found tucked in a cedar chest that once belonged to his mother. She'd mended it herself, stitch by stitch, the way she'd come to mend everything else in her life. Lawson shaved for the first time in weeks, though the edge of his jaw still bore the shadow of work. He'd trimmed the cuffs of his only coat and stood with his boots polished, a sprig of rosemary tucked into the lapel. They spoke their vows with no preacher present, just the land and a handful of neighbors who'd come to know them not by past misgivings, but by their steady hands and open door. Afterward, the widow from the settlement brought cornbread wrapped in cloth, and the boy with dark eyes who once hid behind the rain barrel offered Gwenna a carved whistle of his own making. She cupped it in her palm, touched by the quiet offering. Lawson took her hand as the sun dipped behind the ridge. "You ready to stop sleeping in the loft?" She looked toward the house, then back at him. "I was ready the day I stayed." That night, as the wind shifted and autumn took its first full breath, Gwenna moved her things from the loft to the room at the back of the house. The bed was simple, the quilt patched with pieces of both their lives, a square from her old apron, a bit of ticking from his childhood mattress. They laid down side by side, not as guests in each other's lives, but as the ones who would carry the days forward. In the weeks that followed, the first snow arrived. It dusted the pasture and softened the edges of the hills. Gwenna hung bundles of dried herbs in the rafters and kept jars of preserved roots in the cellar. The room smelled of cedar and dried lavender. People came more often now, not just for medicine, but to offer eggs, wool, or news from town. One morning, Lawson returned from the ridge with a basket of quail eggs and a letter wrapped in oilcloth. Gwenna opened the envelope with careful fingers, reading it once, then again. He watched her face. "Good or bad?" She folded it. "A woman I knew back east, she's teaching now in Oregon, said someone mentioned my name in a letter, asked if I was still alive. You want to write her back?" Gwenna tucked the paper into the drawer beside the stove. "I think I will, but not today," he nodded. Winter settled thick and slow. They kept the fire burning through long nights, and Gwenna stitched new curtains for the windows. Lawson built a second coop behind the barn and repaired the sled runners for hauling wood. On Sundays, they read aloud by lamplight, her voice low and even, his rougher but steady with each page. When the snow melted and spring returned, Gwenna planted rows of calendula beside the porch. The yellow blossoms opened fast, reaching toward the sun with the same quiet assurance she'd come to wear herself. She found Lawson mending a gate one afternoon, sleeves rolled, hat shading his eyes. She stepped beside him, brushing sawdust from his shoulder. "You ever wonder if your brother would have stayed, if things had been different?" Lawson paused, resting his forearm on the fence. "Sometimes, but I think he left what he could behind." Enough for me to build something better. They walked the pasture then, the grass new and green beneath their boots. A calf followed them partway, nosing at Gwenna's skirt until she laughed and pushed it gently aside. "How many heads do we have now?" she asked. "Just shy of 40. Maybe more come summer." She shielded her eyes against the sun. "We'll need another hand if it keeps growing." He looked at her. "You thinking of hiring?" "I was thinking of raising one." He stopped walking. "You mean?" She nodded. "I haven't missed a cycle since the frost came." He took her hand, fingers warm and sure. "You feel well, tired, hungry, but I'm steady." His voice was soft. "Then we'll build for 3. She rested her head against his shoulder as they stood together, the wind tugging gently at the hem of her dress. Through the seasons that followed, they tended the land and each other. The house grew louder with new life, but never lost its peace. Gwenna taught Lawson's letters to the widowed woman's son, and he taught her how to read the weather by the shape of the clouds. In the quiet moments between planting and birth, between harvest and rest, they held each other without need for words. There were still hard days, still losses and storms, but none of it felt like breaking. It felt like living. And when, years later, the boy they raised ran across the porch with dirt on his knees and questions in his mouth, Lawson would look at Gwenna and know there had never been a wrong turn. Only the long road that led them home. They grew old together beneath the same sky that had watched them begin. And the land, ever patient, held their story in root and stone, in blossom and frost. A life built slow, honest, and strong. A love that never needed proving again.